Hello, my name is Luke Wolf, and I am making the magical world of the Afterrealms, a real-time strategy role-playing game. To start, you have control over a single character in a land filled with resources, magic, and mystery. The idea behind Afterrealms is to use your magic to create your mini-society, expand your territory, grow in power, and cast devastating spells to dominate your opponents. The game is currently in early development, so there is not much to it yet, but both single player and multiplayer are planned features. It's been another month, and things are moving slowly with some development. In this video, I will go through what has been completed so far, what is still being worked on, and what is next in line for development. Most of the last month and a bit, I have been working on features surrounding the spellbook in the UI, and getting some basic spells ready for the player to use in the first testing release of the game. The spellbook is an essential tool for the player to get their society started, become more powerful by possessing mana and magical artifacts, and their primary means of attack and defense against the enemy. Here is what has been completed so far. When you spawn into the game, you will automatically be given access to a spellbook. This spellbook will have all of the player's acquired spells inside it. At the start of the game, you will be given some free spells depending on the type of map you are starting on. As I currently do not have any assets for this yet, I am just resembling the spellbook as a button with an S in the middle of it. Clicking on this will open up the spellbook window. You will then see the icon of spells that you have acquired in this window here. This is not exactly that new, but what is new is what you can do with these spells. You can now use them. In the last video, I described being able to assign certain keys so the player can cast these spells using the keyboard. But there's actually a problem with this design. It doesn't make it very easy for the player to quickly change spells, move around, use them at the same time, and one very big problem was that assuming the spell would fire on the press of a key, then it would simply fire in front of the player. This would only allow 8 possible directions to fire a spell, and that's not giving the player much choice over where they want the spell to go, when you have a top-down view of the game and a big area to work around in. Therefore, aiming would become a very serious problem. With all of these issues creating so many mechanical problems, the player would find it extremely hard to do the simplest of things, being able to move around easily whilst aiming and having control over where the spells are going. All of these are a simple mix of mechanics at the level where doing them simultaneously without much thought or effort is really important for the player's experience. The player should be focusing on achieving the objectives of the game and not stressing about being able to perform the simplest of expected mechanics. So after preemptively identifying these issues for a release, I came up with a solution. Since the player moves using the keyboard, then we can easily keep movement comfortable for them and utilise the mouse to help with aiming and casting spells. The idea was simple, but the implementation was a bit tricky to get right. First, I created a couple of spellbar slots down in the player bar. These slots would display which spells the player selected for each mouse click. The left one would be the left mouse click, and the right one would be the right mouse click. So when the player clicks on the respective button on their mouse, it would cast whatever spell shown in that slot. To do this, I had to find a way to track what spell the player was clicking on in the spellbook to save it to the correct spellbar slot. Then the player, when clicking, which spell to cast. I also added the control key as a keybind for opening and closing the spellbook. Holding down the control key will open the spellbook and releasing it will close the spellbook. This mechanic allows the player in the heat of battle to change spells quickly instead of having to click the spellbook button, select the spell, and then close it again. I will look into how this can be optimised further after the game is at a stage where players can test the battle system, but I thought this would be a handy thing to add for now. This is also different from my initial idea of dragging spells to the spellbar, but I believe this new idea is a lot more efficient for the player to handle. This new system allows me to add new spells to the game without having to do a lot. All I have to do is add a graphical texture that I'm going to use as a bullet, create an object of properties for the spell here, and that's it. The code I've written does the rest. For the more technically minded individuals, here's more about the code I'm using. I use a function called load spellbook, and in this function we do everything we need to get the spellbook ready for the player before they even see the game screen. First, we load the JSON object with all of the spell objects and their properties, then the spellbook button for the UI, before moving on to enabling opening, closing and dragging the spellbook window. And here's the exciting bit. We loop through the spellbook JSON file to grab each spell before assigning them their visual UI properties and functionality. Then, when the player opens the spellbook, we display what spells the player actually has acquired. For the spellbar slots, I simply added a couple of textures suitable to tell the player that they are slots and they are empty, but at the right size to tell them that they are for spells. Then, when the player goes to select a spell, we get the data from the spellbook JSON, including everything about the spell, store it visually in the UI for the player to see this, and then we pass the spellbook slot information to a couple of variables that we are storing on the player character itself. So when the player clicks the left or right mouse button, it will read the spells stored in these variables to change the animation of the player as well as create the spell projectile you see in game. Each spell will travel across the game area for a set period of time, as you have been seeing if it's a projectile, and will have a certain cooldown before being able to cast again. Some spells will be that powerful that only one spell will be allowed to be casted once until it is finished, such as the castle spell here, that I'm still working on. They will also eventually drain a certain amount of mana out of the player's maximum mana capacity when casting. It is an incredible system so far, and I want to take this opportunity to give a shout out to Twitch members EnjoyToLive, Eradukake and RockHopperGames for their help in getting this system up and running. The player can now cast the Fireball spell, the Possession spell, and the Castle spell, the three basic spells that will get them started. Now that we have casting complete, it's time to work on actually making those spells do something when they land. As you can see, I am working on this with the Castle spell at the moment, but to get the others to work, I'm going to need to introduce a health system, create a really basic monster spawning system, and give the player the ability to increase their magic value by possessing mana and magical artifacts. I will be working on these over the next month and a half, and hopefully by June, you will see the basics of these complete. Streaming on Twitch has currently been placed on hold due to much work on my plate. But when I get myself more organised again, I will be streaming and my schedule calendar will become public once more. That's it for now. I will post links to our community channels such as Discord in the description of this video. If you could like, share and subscribe to help support my project, I would really appreciate it. Until next time, my name is Luke Wolf, and thank you very much for watching.